And number 6, the style and the vocabulary are more unlike the rest of the gospel than any other paragraph in the gospel. Those are the reasons that scholars think it didn't belong and doesn't belong in John's gospel as he wrote it.
This is what we refer to as an internal argument. So he's arguing based on the grammar, the vocabulary, the style, that John 7:53 through 8:11 is not Johannine. It is not something that shows itself to be consistent with the rest of the grammatical and vocabulary usage that we find in the rest of the Gospel of John. Most people would agree that arguments like this are very subjective. You can find one person who could say this information here wasn't written by John, and other people who would say, no, this is Johannine vocabulary, this is Johannine style, this proves it's authentic. Some people, Chris Keith comes to mind again, would even say that the style of John 7:53 through 8:11 is definitely Johannine, but he says it could also have been imitated. The style could have been imitated by someone who inserted the text. Well, I went and pulled another book down off my shelf just to read a little bit more on this issue of what are the arguments for or against John 7:53 through 8:11. Is it an absolutely ridiculous argument to say that John 7:53 through 8:11 could be from the hand of the same author who wrote the rest of the gospel? And the book that I pulled down was the Greek New Testament according to the majority text. This was the majority text Greek New Testament that was published by, edited by Zane Hodges and Arthur Farstad. This is the text I have is the second edition of it. And they have a section in the introduction. It's Roman numeral 23, page 23 and following, where they discuss the Pericope Adulterae, knowing that it is a controversial text, but it was a text that appeared in the majority of New Testament manuscripts, and therefore it is in the text of their printing of the majority Greek New Testament. But they discuss, this is Roman numeral now, page, let's see, this is starting on Roman numeral page 23 and going on to page 24. They discuss both the external and the internal arguments for the PA, but I think what they say about the internal arguments is particularly interesting and in complete contradiction to what John Piper says. Here's what they say. Again, this is the introduction to the Greek New Testament according to the majority text, edited by Zane Hodges and Arthur Farstad, second edition, and this is published by Thomas Nelson Publishers in 1985. They say, quote, "It is clear that the textual troubles which overlook the pericope began early. It is omitted by the most ancient witnesses for the Egyptian tradition, namely P66, P75, Sinaiticus, and Vaticanus. It was also evidently absent from C and even from A." And just pause there. It seems like we're unclear about what C and A or Alexandrinus read, but apparently it's absent from those also, which in the Gospels often sides with the majority text. But the joint testimony of these manuscripts, except perhaps for A, Alexandrinus, simply may point to a very ancient copy from which the passage was missing. In other words, they're saying P66, P75, Sinaiticus, and Vaticanus, and any others that may omit the PA may have had simply an archetype that omitted it. Now, that's the little statement on external evidence. What I really wanted to get to is what they say about internal evidence. They go on to write, "There is no compelling reason to doubt that the story is originally Johannine, despite the prevailing contrary opinion. Among the marks of Johannine style which it exhibits, none is clearer than the phrase in chapter 8, verse 6. Then it gives the Greek, tuta de elegon pyrazantes auton, which translated is, and they said this, tempting him. This, they say, is a pure and simple Johannism, which is evident by comparison with John 6:6, John 7:39, John 11:51, John 12:6, John 12:33, and John 21:19. Likewise, the use of the vocative, gunai, or woman, in chapter 8, verse 10, by Jesus to address a woman is a Johannine characteristic. Compare John 2:4, John 4:21, John 19:26. Compare also John 20:13 and John 20:15. They continue. The phrase meketi hamartane, sin no more, chapter 8, verse 11, occurs nowhere else in the New Testament except John 5:14. And the historic present, agusi, which is they bring, or in chapter 8, verse 3, is consonant with John's frequent use of this idiom. They continue, nor is the narrative improperly suited to the place where it is found in the overwhelming majority of the 900 copies which contain it. This was written in 1985. Now, Maurice Robinson says it's actually in over 1,400 manuscripts. On the contrary, they continue, a setting at the Feast of Tabernacles, compare John 7:2, John 7:14, is ideal for the story. It was on just such an occasion when Jerusalem was crowded with pilgrims that strangers might be thrown together with the resulting sin around which the story centers. An interview with a woman in a court of the temple would likely have been in the court of the women. And that is evidently where Jesus was, as the reference to the treasury in chapter 8, verse 20 indicates. Moreover, they continue, the way in which the woman's accusers are driven to cover by the moral exposure which Jesus brings upon them furnishes a suggestive introduction to the initial Johannine reference to the Lord as the light of the world in John 8:12. The setting of the incident at daybreak is likewise suitable, chapter 8, verse 2, since the rising sun furnishes the natural backdrop for the same title. It is in fact to the sun, not the temple candelabra, as Hort thought, that the title Light of the World refers. Compare John 9:4 and 5, John 11:9. Finally, as the Qumran finds have shown, the thought of forgiveness of sin experienced here by the woman is properly linked to the phrase, the light of life, John 8:12. And here's their concluding paragraph. I know it was a long passage to read, but they say, in view of the features of the Johannine style that have been noted, and the narrative's almost unique suitability to this context, the idea that the passage is not authentically Johannine must finally be dismissed. If it is not an original part of the fourth gospel, its writer would have to be viewed as a skilled Johannine imitator, and its placement in this context as the shrewdest piece of interpolation in literary history. Accordingly, the consideration of the narrative text that follows assumes its Johannine authenticity. So we've got John Piper telling us the style and the vocabulary of the Pericope Adulterae is unlike the rest of the gospel. It's more unlike the rest of the gospel than any other paragraph that we can find within the Gospel of John. But on the other hand, we have Zane Hodges and Arthur Farstad, who are credentialed New Testament scholars and text critics, who say no, the style, the vocabulary is completely consistent with Johannine usage. And many other people say that as well. Again, in the end, it almost becomes a sort of a battle of the experts. Which experts are you going to believe? Are you going to follow the experts who support the modern critical text, or are you going to follow the experts who support and defend the traditional text of the New Testament?